Today, we find ourselves in a place of transition, as many of us have spoken to. And so we are in transition in more than one way. We've just completed our months-long journey through the theme of refuge, of course, which, in strong alignment with the winter season, was a lot about learning to resource and nourish ourselves, right? And as we look ahead, soon we'll be stepping into a new series, which will take us through most of the spring and summer. And I'm really looking forward to telling you much more about that soon. But right now, we are in between. Not only in this space of practice, but for many of us in our outer ecosystems as well. And one thing I have learned about in-betweens is that there can be a lot of benefit in pausing and paying attention to them, rather than rushing through to get to what's next. So, right now, here in the Northern Hemisphere, we are sitting just 1 week past the spring equinox, which, despite what some of our local forecasts might suggest, marks that official transition from winter to spring. And as a way of honoring this transition, I've spent a lot of time over these past weeks outside, paying attention, and really noticing how much wisdom there is in this time of year. So before we move into what comes next, I wanted to take today to pause here together and reflect on what spring has to teach us about emerging from a season of resourcing and integration into a season of growth in a way that is wise and sustainable and responsive to the ever-shifting conditions that are life, right? So when we look to the natural world at the cusp of spring, and it doesn't really matter whether it's an alpine meadow or just a little patch of garden in a suburban backyard, we can see and sense the landscape beginning to shift. But what we might not immediately see or recognize is that that change was made possible through the very different conditions of the season that came before. So in our culture, we tend to idealize blossoming, right? And it makes sense that it is easy to celebrate the wow factor of spring with so much color and energy that naturally draws our attention. And it also makes sense that we might perceive these changes as separate from the colder and quieter and more monochromatic landscapes of winter. But if we look more attentively, nature teaches us that blossoming is just one chapter in a much longer story, right? And there's a quote, this wonderful quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that speaks to this. He said, "The creation of 1,000 forests is in one acorn." I really love this quote because it reminds me that the full expression of so many forms of life, like even the most magnificent towering tree, was first contained within a tiny little seed. And despite how similar and simple they might look, every seed contains this intricate blueprint of what it might become. But in order for that process of becoming to unfold, first, the seed must spend time in this dark, damp underground, right? With no visible evidence of its potential greatness or strength, and not a single assurance of what lies ahead. And now that is a lot of uncertainty. And I don't know about you, but something about this part of the difficult path of a seed feels relatable to me. I have often used the word buried to describe times in my life where I have felt particularly overwhelmed or just cut off from sources of clarity or foresight about what's coming next. But nature teaches us that there is a profound difference between being buried and being planted. The poet Dinos Christianopoulos said, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." Ah, I love that. When we are planted, these seasons of darkness are not interruptions in our growth trajectory or some kind of problem that we have to figure out or overcome. Instead, they are precisely the conditions that are required in that larger process of transformation, even if we can't see what we are becoming. And this is where trust comes in. Because from the perspective of a seed, it may be impossible to even imagine its fullest expression, right? But thankfully, nature shows us that a clear vision of fruition is not required for growth. And if we can learn to trust in the inherent intelligence of the unfolding, we might begin to relate to our inner and outer winters as wisely orchestrated periods of refuge and integration that are just as essential to blooming as the spring rain and the sun. So, since the seed already contains the blueprint for growth, and we aren't responsible for orchestrating a process of growth that is honestly a lot above our pay grade as human beings, then what is ours to do? What is our practice? Well, my friends, you may find it either liberating or maddening, depending on the day, to hear that once again, our practice is about allowing and opening to what's here. Spring says, sustainable growth isn't about just pushing harder or having more energy to make things happen. It is at least as much about becoming more porous. In the spring, the earth is uniquely softened by the thaw and the rain. And this softening is what allows the soil to become that fertile environment for seeds to sprout. So in the Buddhist tradition, there is this inherent potential called Tathagata Garbha. It's a bit of a mouthful, right? And this means the Buddha seed, or it's sometimes also translated as Buddha nature. And it's the same idea that the potential for full awakening is already inside us. So just like the tree in the acorn, and it points to the truth that our job is not to create our awakening or to make blossoming happen, but to soften the soil of our hearts and minds so that what is already there can unfold. And we notice this when our inner soil is hard or compacted by striving or pressure or trying to make it all happen or fit it all in. The resources that are already present are more likely to just run off the surface than to sink in. So we can become like hard clay that is resistant to the very nourishment we need. But when we become porous or more open and receptive to what's present, it's like allowing the sun and the rain to actually reach and nourish the seed. And with the right resources, as nature shows us, the seed knows what to do all on its own, right? No micromanaging by us required. As that seed opens and begins to sprout, pretty quickly, another honest teaching from nature is clear. Growth, when it's new, is tender. A seedling is far more vulnerable than an established tree or even a planted seed because it no longer has the protection of its earthy cocoon and it hasn't yet developed the strength or the resilience of its full form. And I think this says so much about the radical gentleness that emergence asks of us. And it feels a little counterintuitive sometimes. Like, okay, growth is here. Like, let's go. Let's push now. But when something new is growing in us, and this can be anything, a new boundary, a new understanding, a new capacity, whatever these things are that are just finding their shape, they are asking to be met with care and tenderness rather than pushed or rushed or judged against the full-grown version of what they might become. So new growth is vulnerable by nature. But through awareness and practice, we can learn to tend it with kindness and compassion. Several of you spoke to this today. We can listen to what it's teaching us. We can adjust how we're holding it and working with it, rather than letting expectations or judgments of how we think it should be or how it has been before freeze or scorch it before it's had this chance to fully develop. So this is part of the tending of becoming the full expressions of ourselves, is learning that wisdom and not rushing what's emerging and protecting and caring for it as it finds its strength. And as we stay with this image of growth unfolding, spring has a lot to teach us, y'all. There are even more wise reflections for it to share. I've been amazed in these last couple of weeks. It just keeps on coming. So this season of blossoming is made possible through an extraordinary level of cooperation across the ecosystem. And I'm going to offer you one incredible example of this. Flowers of all kinds rely on pollination, right? And in fact, most life on Earth depends on it. And what I find especially beautiful about this life-giving cycle is how it happens. So the bee, which plays such a vital role in this process, is not moving through the world with a sense of pressure or obligation to keep the whole world alive, which is a specialty of mine, or striving to make spring happen, even though it has this big responsibility in the larger unfolding. Have you ever watched a bee bury itself in a flower? Have you seen this? Next time you see a bee bumbling its way towards a blossom, I highly recommend just pausing and really taking this in. I've watched hundreds of them now. It's one of my favorite things. And bees are so obviously drawn by something deep inside them towards a flower. So they come bumbling and plunge themselves right into the heart of it. They totally immerse themselves in that sweetness, like get it all over them, and then emerge visibly covered in pollen, which is the most hilarious, sweet thing, before continuing on to the next flower. And there is such a joy to it. The bee, not striving, not under pressure, following the sweetness. It lets itself be drawn towards what nourishes it and what feels alive and energizing. And in following that impulse, bees become part of supporting the entire ecosystem in flourishing. And there is something so deeply wise in this. We are often taught and conditioned from a very young age that growth is a product of relentless effort and discipline, and for making 5 and 10 and 20-year plans that account for every possible scenario, right? And without making that approach wrong, it seems to me that bees show us that there is a totally different way. What if part of sustainable growth and living with purpose is not about striving, but about sensing what draws us? What if it's about paying attention to what feels nourishing and sweet and brings a sense of aliveness and joy to the body? Not as a way of avoiding effort. Effort is definitely not wrong, but this way of allowing our lives to be guided and shaped by the sweetness that's already here. And this can feel radical. It really did for me as I started to realize this. Someone who had spent decades feeling that really, really hard work was the only way to make a meaningful contribution in this world. And if bees show us how growth can be guided instead by what calls us forward, what does spring teach us about how what grows in us emerges into the world? So if you've ever been outside at first light, or maybe you sleep with a window open, you've probably heard what is often referred to as the dawn chorus. Has everybody heard this, the dawn chorus? So if you aren't familiar, it is all these birds from many different species singing together to greet the day. And this is one of my very, very favorite signs of spring. I was delighting in it just this morning. And what moves me about it most is that the birds are not performing in the way that we often do, or comparing or adjusting their song based upon what's most popular this season, or what the algorithm might have to say, right? Instead, they are singing the song that is alive in them. That song that came pre-installed in their hearts. And the result is something incredibly beautiful. Not because it is so well rehearsed or perfect, but because the songs in that chorus are true. Ooh. Really touches something deeply in me. When something in us begins to grow, this can be a new way of being, a new expression, a new offering. At a certain phase of emergence, we are faced with a decision about how or if it will take shape in the world. And as we touched on, this is where it can get vulnerable. In those tender stages of new growth, there can be this very human tendency to hesitate or to compare or to question whether what we have to offer is good enough, or to take great lengths to try to shape it into something we think other people are going to appreciate. And believe me, I know this one all too well on a personal level. But the Dawn Chorus offers us a totally different strategy. It reminds us that what's true inside us and what is ours to offer is not asking to be judged or managed. It's just asking to be expressed. To let what is alive in us be heard and seen and shared more broadly with the world. And when we do this, we add to the course in a way that only we can. No one else can sing the song in your heart, my friends. And it is such a gift to the world to let it be heard. So, as we find ourselves here in this in-between, just beyond the equinox, at the edge of this seasonal turning, kind of emerging from our winter of refuge, maybe the invitation is not to ask, how do I bring on the blossoming? Although I understand that impulse. But maybe it's to sense what is already growing within us, or to notice what we are being invited to soften and receive rather than push, or to pay attention to what draws us forward, and to trust that what feels true and alive in us is ours to share. Because when we look to the natural world, spring teaches that growth is not forced or only what we see above the surface, but it unfolds intelligently. So it is in alignment with the conditions that support it, like trust and receptivity and connection, and through the courage to express what is true. And just like the seed, we do not need to have it all figured out in order to begin. We just need to soften and tend to what emerges with care. So in our practice today, this is what we will create space for, okay? To sense all of this and to make some room for whatever might want to unfurl. So let's practice, my friends. And I'll invite you to prepare the body for a period of stillness. I've been speaking a while, so if there's anything you need, maybe a stretch, drink of water. Apparently I am demoing all these things. And when you're ready, you can choose a posture that feels open and receptive and soft. So inviting the body to mirror that fertile soil of spring, whatever that might mean to you. And as you begin to settle in, you might close the eyes or soften the gaze. And we'll begin with a little aeration of the soil. So a few deeper, fuller breaths. So on the inhale, drawing the breath deep into the body. That sense of opening and expanding. And on the exhale, just emptying, softening. And taking a few breaths like this. A deep, full in-breath. Sensing the aliveness the breath brings. And on the exhale, just letting go, settling in. And allowing the breath now to return to its natural rhythm. We will briefly scan through the body, just noticing if there are any obvious areas of tightness or tension. And without forcing anything, a gentle invitation for any loosening, unwinding, softening. Anywhere in the body that might want to let go. And as we soften and land, sensing the support beneath you, and allowing yourself to be held. And widening the attention now to take in this whole body breathing. You might sense the resources that are already here. The support beneath and above and through you. There is the breath and the earth and the sky and awareness itself. And letting that support sink in like warm rain into softened soil. And from this more open, receptive place, gently opening to a question. What seeds might already be growing within you? It might be something just beginning to germinate. Or maybe it's a tender shoot just starting to emerge. Could be something deepening roots, already growing strength. Or maybe nothing very clear comes into focus, and that's okay too. Just making room for the body and the heart to speak in whatever way. Be an image, an emotion, a sensation. So opening to that inquiry and breathing and noticing. And following now the wisdom of spring, I'll invite you to consider what draws you. So like the bee towards the flower, where might there be places of sweetness in your life that are calling your attention? It might be subtle or strong. It might feel like aliveness or joy, curiosity. or just a wordless pull to lean in. Whatever form it takes, just making room and opening to it. And inviting you now to begin to sense the song in your heart. What might feel true and alive, and in some way want to be expressed through you? Not something to perform or perfect for anyone else's approval. Just something that feels true. Opening and listening in the body, not as much to the stories the mind may have to tell here, and honoring it with your full attention. In these last moments of our practice, I'll invite you to sense, what would it be like to trust this process? So nothing to manage or rush or get right. A softening and allowing and resting in a place of trusting the intelligence in the unfolding. And taking some moments just to let go and allow. We'll close with a poem by Oren J. Sofer called Springtime. I care too much for you and the daffodil to cut its stem from her root in the earth. There are other things I could give you. A smooth gray stone worn by the sea says much in the palm of your hand. Still, the most precious thing I cannot give you. Time spent with your own quiet heart, silently loving itself. So I invite you, give yourself time, an hour or two to wander. Morning and evening light are best for this. Give your feet time to find their way among the bumpy stones and roots, until you begin to see each tree as an old friend you've been longing to greet. Give your fingers time to unfold their wonder like the new spring buds, opening their hands to the unfamiliar, cool air, trusting a memory of the sun's warm touch. Stop long enough to learn their tongue, to hear their fresh and gentle voice singing from the brown husk of winter. Visit long enough to read the smile glowing on their lips as they poke through the ground, press skyward and unfurl their skin. Go to the woods and breathe there. Place your hands into the burning cold of a spring stream. Let the water wash over your face. See the wind ripple and melt the silver surface of a black pond. Lie flat across a broad boulder and let your belly touch the sky. Open the world with your arms and the sun will greet you. You, who are becoming spring, silently loving yourself. Emerging very slowly from this practice, my friends. You might invite a little movement into the body, some deeper, fuller breaths. Thank you for your practice.